The old lighthouse keeper's log had one entry that was never supposed to be read. Written in 1974, the final line said, "If you're reading this, it means the storm has come back. And if the storm has come back, then so has she." When marine biologist Dr. Sarah Chen discovered this log in 2024, while investigating unusual whale beaching patterns off the coast of Widow's Point, Maine, she dismissed it as the ravings of a paranoid man. That was her first mistake. Her second was ignoring the fact that the handwriting in that 50-year-old entry was identical to the signature she'd just written in the visitor's book. Identical, down to the unusual way she crossed her T's. And outside, for the first time in exactly 50 years, the fog was rolling in from the east, bringing with it the sound of a woman singing a lullaby no one had heard in half a century. Widow's Point Lighthouse has stood sentinel over the northern Atlantic for 127 years, its beam cutting through fog and darkness, guiding ships away from the jagged rocks known locally as the Devil's Teeth. But lighthouses aren't just about what they illuminate, they're about what they keep hidden in the dark. In 1974, during what meteorologists called the anomaly, a storm system that defied all natural explanation, the lighthouse keeper, Thomas Whitmore, vanished along with his wife, Rebecca, and their 7-year-old daughter, Emma. The lighthouse was found sealed from the inside. No bodies, no blood. Just that log entry, a child's music box still playing, and wet footprints leading up the stairs, but none leading down. The case went cold. The lighthouse was automated, and the town of Widow's Point learned to forget. But the ocean has a long memory. And some storms don't die, they just sleep, waiting for the perfect moment to return. Before we descend into the mystery of what Dr. Chen uncovered, if you love stories that blur the line between the supernatural and the unexplainable, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to hear is based on classified Coast Guard reports that were sealed for 50 years, reports that were only declassified 3 months ago. Trust me, you won't want to miss where this goes. Now, let's continue. Dr. Sarah Chen wasn't supposed to be at Widow's Point at all. Her research team had been tracking a pod of humpback whales that had inexplicably changed their migration pattern, swimming in circles 50 miles offshore for 3 weeks straight. Marine mammals don't do that. Not without reason. When NOAA satellite imaging showed the whales were circling a specific coordinate, Sarah knew she had to investigate. That coordinate led her to Widow's Point. The lighthouse had been decommissioned in 1999, replaced by an automated beacon system mounted on a steel tower nearby. The original structure had been locked and largely forgotten, slowly surrendering to rust and rot. Sarah had obtained special permission from the Coast Guard to access the building, hoping that historical records might explain if there had been any naval incidents in the area that could account for the whale's strange behavior. She arrived on October 17, 2024, at 4:47 p.m. She noted the exact time because her watch stopped the moment she crossed the threshold. It would remain frozen at 4:47 for the next 11 hours. The interior of the lighthouse was a time capsule. Dust particles danced in the weak afternoon light that filtered through salt-stained windows. The air tasted of brine and something else, something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Sarah's footsteps echoed on the cast-iron spiral staircase as she climbed toward the keeper's quarters. The log was in the third drawer of Thomas Whitmore's desk, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow remained pristine despite 5 decades of coastal humidity. Sarah's hands trembled as she unwrapped it, not from fear, but from the academic thrill of discovering a primary historical source. She had no idea she was holding her own death certificate. The entries were mundane at first: weather observations, ship sightings, maintenance, notes. But as Sarah flipped through the pages, she noticed the handwriting began to deteriorate around September 1974. The entries became erratic. The fog came from the wrong direction today. Emma says she hears her other mother calling from the water. Rebecca has been sleepwalking. I found her on the rocks at dawn, soaking wet, no memory of leaving the house. Then came October 17, 1974, exactly 50 years ago to the day. The entry was long, desperate, written in a shaking hand. The storm is here, not on any radar, not in any forecast. But it's here. Rebecca knows. Emma knows. I'm the only one who doesn't understand yet, but I will. The woman in the water told Rebecca what happens next. She said the storm takes one generation, but it always leaves a door open for the next. She said the storm isn't weather, it's a crossing. She said. The entry ended abruptly, but there was one more line, added later in different ink, in a steadier hand. That's when Sarah's blood went cold. If you're reading this, it means the storm has come back. And if the storm has come back, then so has she. Sarah laughed nervously, a sound that died quickly in the oppressive silence. She was about to close the log when she noticed something that made her breath catch. She pulled out her phone, opened to the photo she'd taken of herself signing the visitor's log downstairs, and placed it next to Thomas Whitmore's final entry. The handwriting was identical. Not similar. Identical. The same slight rightward slant, the same unusual serif on the capital S of Sarah and the capital S of Storm. The same way the tail of the Y curled back on itself. Sarah had studied graphology in college. She knew that handwriting was as unique as a fingerprint. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't possible. Her hands were shaking now, and it wasn't from academic excitement. She fumbled for her phone to take a picture of the entry, but her phone was dead despite being at 78% battery when she'd entered. Her backup camera, also dead. The emergency radio she'd brought, silent static. That's when she heard it. Faint at first, barely audible over the sound of waves against rocks. A music box, playing a lullaby. Coming from somewhere above her, from the lamp room at the very top of the lighthouse. But that was impossible. She'd seen the Coast Guard report. There was no power to this building. There hadn't been power here for 25 years. And yet, the music played on. The same lullaby Rebecca Whitmore had hummed to her daughter. The same lullaby that had been playing when they found the lighthouse empty in 1974. Sarah looked toward the window. Outside, the fog was rolling in from the east. Sarah's rational mind fought against the rising tide of panic. She was a scientist. There had to be an explanation. Music boxes didn't wind themselves. Handwriting similarities could be coincidental. Watches stopped. Batteries died. But when coincidences piled up like this, they stopped being coincidences and started being data. And data told a story. She forced herself to keep reading, flipping through the pages before that final entry. Thomas Whitmore had been meticulous, and as Sarah read, a pattern emerged that made her skin prickle with recognition. In August 1974, Thomas had noted unusual marine behavior, whales circling offshore, dolphins beaching themselves, fish floating to the surface with no signs of disease or injury, just stopping. Dead in water, as if they'd forgotten how to swim. Sarah had seen the exact same reports from the past month. NOAA had 14 confirmed sightings of similar behavior across the same coordinates. In early September 1974, Thomas wrote about the fog. It came from the east, he noted repeatedly, which was wrong. Weather patterns in this region moved west-east, driven by prevailing winds from the continental interior. But this fog came from the ocean, rolling inland like something with purpose. Sarah had checked the meteorological data before coming here. For the past week, fog had been appearing from the east, confounding local weather stations. One meteorologist had called it a reversal of natural atmospheric flow that shouldn't be possible outside of a hurricane system. There was no hurricane. Mid-September 1974, Rebecca Whitmore began having dreams. Thomas's entries became concerned, protective. She wakes up speaking words she doesn't know. I recorded her last night, played it back. It's not English. It's not any language I recognize, but Emma responds to it. Emma answers in the same tongue, though she's never heard it before. How does a 7-year-old know words that don't exist? Sarah's mouth went dry. 3 days ago, before coming to Widow's Point, she'd had a dream. In it, she'd been standing in the ocean, water up to her knees, and a woman's voice had been teaching her words. When she woke, she'd found herself speaking aloud, phone in hand, voice memo app recording. She'd listened to it once, then deleted it, disturbed by the guttural sounds that had come from her own mouth. Sounds she didn't remember making, words she couldn't possibly know. Late September 197. 4. Found Rebecca on the rocks again. 3rd time this week. She says the woman in the water is showing her something. A door, she calls it. Says it only opens once per generation. Says the woman has been waiting. Says the woman needs someone to remember her, or she'll be forgotten completely, and if she's forgotten, she becomes something worse than dead. She becomes erased, and erased things get angry. Erased things want back in. Sarah's eyes blurred. She blinked hard, realizing with distant horror that she was crying. Why was she crying? She felt a grief she couldn't name, a loss she'd never experienced, mourning someone she'd never met. The feeling was so intense it doubled her over, and she gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. When the wave of emotion passed, she looked down and saw her tears had fallen on the log. On an entry dated October 1st, 1974, Emma drew a picture today. She won't tell us what it is. But Rebecca knows. Rebecca always knows now. The picture shows our lighthouse. It shows our family, me, Rebecca, Emma. But there's a fourth figure, taller than me, standing in the water behind us. And Emma has drawn us all holding hands in a line, leading from the lighthouse to the water. She says the woman told her that's how families work here. One generation holds the door open for the next. One generation remembers so the next one can forget. But we broke the cycle, Emma says. We forgot on purpose. And now the debt is due. Sarah flipped the page with trembling fingers. The next entry was the last before the final warning message. It was dated October 16, 1974, written in Rebecca's handwriting, not Thomas's. She's shown me what happens to ones who remember. They don't die. They become the door itself. Thomas doesn't believe me yet. But he will. Tomorrow when the storm comes, he'll understand. We all will. I'm writing this for whoever comes next, for whoever finds this. You're reading this because you're like me. You're reading this because the whales brought you here, just like they brought us. You're reading this because you've already started sleepwalking, already started speaking the words, already started remembering things that haven't happened to you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But there's no stopping it now. The woman in the water has chosen you, and she always gets what she's owed. The signature at the bottom wasn't Rebecca Whitmore's name. It was Sarah Chen's. In handwriting she'd developed in 3rd grade, written 50 years before she was born. The music box stopped playing. In the sudden silence, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, rapid and shallow, and beneath it another sound, rhythmic, patient, breathing, but not hers. It was coming from above, from the lamp room where the music box had been playing, where nothing living should be. Every instinct screamed at Sarah to run, get out of the lighthouse, get back to her car, drive away from Widow's Point and never look back. But her legs wouldn't move. Not because she was frozen with fear, though fear was certainly there, electric and sharp. No, she couldn't move because part of her didn't want to. Part of her needed to know, needed to understand, needed to climb those stairs and see what was waiting. That part of her was winning. She found herself standing, the log still clutched in her hands, moving toward the spiral staircase that led to the lamp room. Each step upward was a small eternity. The iron rang hollow beneath her feet. The breathing grew louder, and with it came a smell, salt water and something organic, like seaweed rotting in the sun. The walls seemed to press inward, and Sarah realized with clinical detachment that she was hyperventilating. The door to the lamp room was open. It shouldn't have been. The Coast Guard report said it had been welded shut after 1974, a safety measure to prevent vandals from accessing the dangerous lamp mechanism. But the door stood wide, and beyond it, the massive Fresnel lens caught the dying light, fracturing it into rainbow shards that danced across the curved walls. And there, in the center of the room, was the music box. It sat on the floor, lid open, the tiny ballerina frozen mid-pirouette. The mechanism was wound down, silent, but Sarah could see barnacles crusted on its base, strands of kelp draped across its corners. It had been underwater. Recently. "Hello, Sarah." The voice came from behind her, and Sarah spun, nearly dropping the log. At first she saw nothing. Then the light shifted, and she understood why the breathing had sounded wrong. The woman standing in the doorway wasn't breathing air, she was breathing water. It ran from her mouth with each exhalation, pooled at her feet, seawater dark and cold. Her dress was from another era, simple cotton that might once have been blue, but was now the color of things drowned. Her hair moved as if still underwater, floating around her face in slow, graceful waves. But it was her eyes that held Sarah frozen. They were Emma Whitmore's eyes. Sarah knew because there was a photograph in the log. A fad? Ed, picture of the keeper's daughter, 7 years old, smiling at the camera. The same eyes, the same face. But this woman was no child. She was ageless and ancient simultaneously, young and old, alive and impossibly not. "You came," the woman said, water spilling over her lips. "Every 50 years, one of you comes. One who can remember, one who can hold the door." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, though part of her, that deep, dark part that had been speaking unknown words in her sleep, understood perfectly. "The woman in the water," Emma said, though calling her Emma felt wrong somehow. Emma had been the child. This thing was what the child had become. She was real, you know. My mother didn't hallucinate. None of them did. The women who came before, the women who will come after. What woman? What door? "The lighthouse isn't just a lighthouse," Emma explained, moving closer, leaving wet footprints that steamed slightly in the cold air. "It's a threshold, a crossing point between the water and the land, between what is and what should be forgotten. Every 50 years the boundary weakens. Every 50 years she needs someone to remember her name, or she fades further. And if she fades completely, what happens if she fades?" Emma smiled, and it was a terrible thing, full of love and sorrow and something that might have been pity. "Then she stops being a person and becomes a force, a hunger. And forces don't discriminate. They don't choose. They just consume. Right now she's contained. Right now she only takes the ones who volunteer to remember. But if she's forgotten entirely, she'll take everyone. The whole coast. Maybe more. We can't let that happen." "We?" Sarah's voice cracked. "I'm not part of this. I'm not—" "You signed your name in my father's log 50 years before you were born," Emma interrupted gently. "You've been part of this since before you existed. The woman in the water doesn't work in linear time. She exists in the crossing, where past and future touch. She chose you before you were conceived. She's been waiting for you. And you've been walking toward this moment your entire life, even if you didn't know it." Sarah shook her head violently. No, I'm leaving. This is insane. This is—" "Look out the window," Emma said. "Tell me what you see." Sarah didn't want to look. But her body moved without permission, turning toward the great lamp-room windows that faced the sea. Outside, the fog had thickened into a wall of gray, but through it, Sarah could see lights. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They danced on the water's surface, bobbing and weaving like will-o'-wisps. No, not on the water. Under it. They were rising from the depths, getting closer, and as they neared, Sarah could see they weren't lights at all. They were faces, glowing, phosphorescent faces of women, each one different, each one rising toward the surface with mouths open in silent song. "The ones who remembered," Emma whispered. "The ones who held the door. 50 years ago, that was my mother. 50 years before that, someone else. The line goes back to when the lighthouse was built, and before that, to when there was just a bonfire on these rocks. Indigenous peoples knew about the crossing. They tended it, honored it, kept the boundary strong. But colonizers don't listen to indigenous wisdom. They built the lighthouse without permission, without understanding what they were marking. And the woman in the water has been collecting debt ever since." The faces in the water were closer now. Sarah could see details, eyes that had seen decades pass, mouths that had spoken languages dead and living, hands that reached upward, beckoning. "What do they want?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "They want you to join them," Emma said. "They want you to remember her name. And once you do, once you speak it aloud, you become part of the crossing, part of the door. 50 years from now, someone else will come. Someone else will read the log and find their own handwriting in it. Someone else will hear the music box and see the faces in the water. And the cycle continues. The boundary holds. The woman stays contained. And if I refuse—" Emma's smile faded. "Then she fades. Then the boundary breaks. Then everyone pays the price for your freedom." Sarah looked at the log in her hands, at the signature she hadn't written yet, wouldn't write for 50 years, at the impossible proof that she had no choice, had never had a choice. The universe had already decided. Or had it? "There has to be another way," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. The scientist in her refused to accept cosmic inevitability. Problems had solutions. Patterns could be broken. Cycles could be interrupted. "You're telling me that for over a century, this entity has been fed volunteers every 50 years, and no one's ever tried to stop it. No one's ever found another solution. Emma's expression shifted, something flickering in those ageless eyes. Surprise? Hope? It was gone too quickly for Sarah to identify. "They've tried this," he said softly. In 1924, the keeper was a man named Joseph Hart. He read the warnings left by his predecessor. He prepared for the storm. When it came, he tried to destroy the lighthouse, thinking that would break the boundary. He rigged the lamp mechanism to explode, figuring if there was no threshold, there could be no crossing. What happened? The explosion never came. The fuses went dead. The dynamite turned to clay in his hands. The lighthouse wouldn't allow itself to be destroyed. And when the storm passed and he'd refused to remember, refused to speak her name, the woman in the water took his choice away. Every person in the town of Widows Point fell asleep that night, all 247 of them, and they walked, in their sleep, straight into the ocean. Men, women, children. They walked until the water covered them, and they didn't stop walking until they drowned. Sarah felt sick. How do you know this? If everyone died, 3 survived, 3 people who weren't in town that night. They came back to find the entire population gone, wet footprints leading from every house to the shore. The incident was blamed on a mass hallucination, a shared psychotic break. But the survivors knew better. One of them left a journal. It's in the archives at the Historical Society. No one reads it anymore. No one wants to know. The faces in the water were at the rocks now, pressing against the boundary between sea and air, their mouths moving in unison, singing that soundless song. Sarah could feel it somehow, vibrating in her bones, a frequency just below hearing that made her teeth ache. "What's her name?" Sarah asked. "The woman in the water. You keep calling her that, but shh. E must have had a name. If I'm supposed to remember her, I need to know who she is." Emma hesitated, and for the first time Sarah saw genuine fear cross her face. "Names have power here," she said, "especially her name. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Once you know it, you start to become part of her story. That's how the remembering works. That's how the crossing begins. Then how do I have a choice? If knowing her name starts the process, and you're about to tell me her name, then I'm already trapped, because I'm not going to tell you," Emma said. And something in her voice had changed. She sounded more human suddenly, more like the 7-year-old girl in the photograph than the ageless thing she'd become. "I'm going to offer you something no one's been offered before. A true choice. You can leave. Right now. Walk down those stairs, get in your car, and drive away. The storm will pass. I'll take your place. I'll remember for another 50 years, and maybe the next person who comes will be braver than you. Or maybe the cycle will finally break, and the boundary will fail, and everyone will pay the price. That's one choice. And the other?" Emma moved to the window, pressing her palm against the glass. The faces in the water surged forward, eager. "The other is you stay. You learn her name. You speak it at the moment of crossing when the storm reaches its peak. And you join us in the water, holding the boundary, keeping her contained. 50 years of existence between worlds, neither alive nor dead, neither awake nor asleep. 50 years of remembering someone who the world has tried to forget, and then release when the next person comes. That's the other choice." Sarah's mind raced. There had to be a third option. There was always a third option. That's what her thesis advisor had taught her. When faced with a binary choice, create a tertiary solution. Think laterally. The problem was the woman in the water needed to be remembered, and no one wanted to remember her. But what if? What if more people remembered? Sarah asked suddenly. What if instead of one person every 50 years, many people remembered? What if her name became common knowledge? Would that weaken her or strengthen her? Emma turned sharply. "What do you mean? You said she needs to be remembered or she becomes a force, a hunger. But the setup is that she's only remembered by one person at a time, in secret, in isolation. That's not real remembrance. That's imprisonment. What if we changed the terms? What if we told everyone, made her part of history, part of the public record? Would that satisfy the requirement?" For a long moment, Emma was silent. Then, slowly, she began to shake her head. "It's been tried. In 1874, the keeper tried to publish his story in the local newspaper. The presses jammed, the typeset melted. Every copy that managed to print became unreadable within hours, the ink running like tears. The lighthouse protects its secret. The boundary requires witnesses, but it cannot allow testimony, because testimony would break the cycle, Sarah realized. If people knew, they'd burn the lighthouse down, Coast Guard or no Coast Guard. They'd dynamite it from the sea. They'd do whatever it took to end this. Yes, and the woman in the water knows that. So she ensures the story stays contained. One keeper, one sacrifice, one witness per generation. That's the rule. Sarah looked at the log in her hands, at the impossible signature, at the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about the whales circling in patterns that made no sense, about the words she'd spoken in her sleep, about the grief she'd felt for someone she'd never known. The universe had been pushing her toward this moment her entire life. Every choice she'd made, every path she'd taken, had led her to this lighthouse, this room, this impossible decision. But Sarah Chen hadn't become a marine biologist by accepting that nature was unchangeable. She'd studied adaptation, evolution, the way systems responded to pressure by transforming. And this system, this cycle of sacrifice and secrecy, was just another ecosystem, and every ecosystem had a weak point. "I'll stay," she said, "but not on her terms. On mine." Emma's eyes widened. "Sarah, you can't negotiate with—" "Watch me," Sarah interrupted. She moved to the window, pressing both palms against the cold glass, staring at the faces in the water. They stared back, hungry and patient and eternally waiting. "I'll remember her. I'll speak her name. But not to join you. To free you. All of you. I'm going to break this cycle one way or another. And if the lighthouse won't let me publish the story, fine. But the internet is bigger than any lighthouse, harder to contain, harder to silence." "They'll stop you," Emma whispered. "The forces that protect the secret. They'll—" "Let them try," Sarah said. Her phone was dead, her camera was dead, but her mind was very much alive. She had a photographic memory. She would transcribe every word of that log. She would document every face in the water. And she would find a way to tell this story, to spread it so far and wide that it couldn't be contained. And maybe that would doom everyone. Or maybe it would finally end this. Either way, she would choose her own path, not walk one written for her 50 years ago. The storm outside intensified. Thunder rolled across the water. And deep below, something ancient and vast began to rise, aware that its terms were being rejected, aware that the cycle it had maintained for over a century was under threat. The crossing was coming, and for the first time in 150 years, no one knew how it would end. The lighthouse shuddered, not from wind. There was no wind yet, just that unnatural fog pressing against every surface. The building itself was trembling, the iron frame resonating with a frequency that made Sarah's vision blur. The faces in the water began to rise, breaking the surface, their phosphorescent glow intensifying until the sea looked like it was boiling with cold fire. "You don't understand what you're doing," Emma said, her voice carrying a note of panic that seemed wrong on that ageless face. "The story can't be told because the telling changes the teller. Everyone who tries to spread the word becomes part of the word. The message becomes the medium. You'll speak her name, and before you can tell anyone else, you'll be in the water with us, and the secret stays buried." "Then I won't speak her name," Sarah said. "You will." Emma recoiled as if struck. I can't. That's not how this works. The new witness has to speak it. The crossing requires someone to remember, someone to bear witness, someone to hold the door. T doesn't specify who. You told me the woman in the water exists outside linear time, that she chose me before I was born. If time doesn't work the way we think it does here, then maybe the rules don't either. Maybe you can speak her name. Maybe you can tell me her story. And maybe, just maybe, I can write it down without becoming part of it because I'll never technically be the one who remembered. You will. I'll just be the transcriber, the messenger. The logic was flawed, Sarah knew, full of holes large enough to sink ships through. But she was gambling that the woman in the water, this entity that existed in crossing points and boundaries, might be bound by loopholes the way folkloric beings often were. Rules were rules, even for forces of nature, especially for forces of nature. Emma stared at her, water streaming from her eyes like tears. "If I tell you, and it doesn't work, you'll join us anyway. You'll have heard the name. You'll be bound. Then we'll both be bound. But at least we'll have tried something different. At least we won't have just accepted our fate." Sarah pulled out her dead phone, her dead camera, and set them aside. Then she found a piece of charcoal from the cold lighthouse stove and tore a blank page from the back of the log. Tell me everything. Let me write it down, and we'll see if the lighthouse can stop the story when it's spoken by the already damned to the not yet condemned." The faces in the water began to keen, a high-pitched sound that shattered the remaining glass in the lamp-room windows. The fog poured in, cold and wet and smelling of things long drowned. The music box began to play again, though its mechanism was clear or broken, the ballerina jerking in spastic movements that matched no rhythm from the mortal world. And Emma Whitmore, or the thing that had been Emma Whitmore for 50 years, began to speak. Her name was Eliza Thorne, she said, and with those words the temperature dropped 20 degrees. She was the wife of the first lighthouse keeper, 1873. She was 23 years old. She was pregnant with their first child, and her husband was a drunk and a monster who beat her when the ships were late and blamed her for storms she didn't summon. Sarah wrote, her hand moving frantically across the paper, charcoal smudging as she went. The words felt hot against her skin, burning like brands. On October 17, 1873, exactly 151 years ago tonight, she threw herself from the lamp-room into the sea. But she didn't die. Not exactly. The boundary between the lighthouse and the ocean caught her, held her, suspended her in that moment of crossing from life to death. And in that suspended moment she made a choice. She could let go, could finally die, or she could hold on, could anchor herself to the boundary, could become the threshold itself. And if she became the threshold, she could prevent others like her from being forgotten. She could demand witness. She could require remembrance. The faces in the water were singing now, their voices blending with Emma's, a chorus of the damned and the determined. So she held on. And every 50 years, when the boundary weakens, she requires payment. One witness, one person to remember that she existed, that she suffered, that she mattered. Because if no one remembers, if she's forgotten completely, then her death meant nothing. And if her death meant nothing, then she becomes nothing. And nothing is angry, nothing is endless, nothing consumes everything. Sarah's hand was cramping, but she kept writing. She could feel pressure building in her skull, a presence trying to force its way inside, but she pushed it back with sheer stubborn will. Not yet. Not until the story was complete. The lighthouse keepers who came after her husband found her body 3 days later, washed up on the rocks. But her body was just a shell. The real Eliza was already in the water, woven into the fabric of the crossing, waiting, and she's been waiting ever since, waiting for someone to acknowledge what was done to her, waiting for someone to say her name and mean it, waiting for someone to remember that she was a person, not just a tragedy. That's all she's ever wanted, to be remembered as human. Emma's voice broke, and we remember her, every one of us who crosses. We hold her name in our hearts for 50 years, and then we pass it on. We keep her human. We keep her from becoming a force. We keep everyone safe from the hunger that unremembered dead become. Sarah finished writing, her hand shaking. The page was covered in charcoal script, smudged and imperfect but readable. The story was there, all of it, the name, the history, the truth. Now came the real test. "Eliza Thorne," Sarah said aloud, speaking to the faces in the water, to the presence that pressed against every wall. "I bear witness. I acknowledge you. You existed. You suffered. You mattered. Your death was not meaningless. Your pain was not invisible. I remember you. We all remember you." The lighthouse went silent. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, holding its breath. Then, from deep below the water, from the very bottom of the ocean, a voice answered. It was beautiful and terrible, young and ancient, human and utterly not. It said one word, free. The faces in the water began to fade, not disappearing but becoming translucent, their phosphorescent glow dimming to something softer, gentler. Emma Whitmore collapsed, her body suddenly mortal again, gasping for air instead of water, coughing up seaweed and brine. The fog began to lift. The lighthouse stopped shaking, and Sarah Chen stood at the center of it all, holding a piece of paper that contained a story no one was supposed to tell, watching as 151 years of boundary keeping began to unravel. But as the storm cleared and the first stars became visible through the broken windows, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the visitor's log downstairs, new handwriting was appearing, writing itself in real time. An entry dated October 17, 2076, 50 years in the future. And it began, the storm returned after 50 years. But this time, it brought something new. Something the woman in the water had been hiding beneath the waves all along. Something that makes Eliza Thorne look like mercy. And if you're reading this, then you're already too late to stop what Sarah Chen set free.